Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I've written a poem last night, which I felt inspired to write. I was actually feeling some discord around the response to homelessness in respect of fires, as distinct to the response to the 116,000 homeless in response to trauma, in actual fact. And I've contemplated more deeply why this discrimination is so strong. We pour our hearts out to those who've lost their houses because they become homeless, which I understand that. We fear that could happen to us if we've worked really hard and bought a house and then lost all our memories, children's photos. No one will be more compassionate towards that than myself. I care deeply about everybody, but in a homeless capacity myself, obviously this is the lens through which I look now, and I'm extremely sensitive toward. I'm seeing a really major disconnect. And I believe it's coming from discrimination. It's coming from poor diagnosis of homelessness. It's coming from unacknowledged prejudices based on an economic mantra that beckons no challenge. Now, I'm trained in economics myself. I worked as a market analyst for 10 years. I also was indoctrinated into, the importance of economy, the importance of jobs, making a living, self-reliance, don't depend on anyone. I mean, I've grown up in Australia that's very much parents push you out the door, you're on your own, sink or swim. Our culture is very harsh. It's part of our culture. And if you go to other parts of the world, you'll find that parents don't push their kids out. They actually don't want them to go. And there is a cultural responsibility to look after family members and love. They would never see their family members on the street. In our culture, we're seeing more on the street, and it's alarming. And they're all ages, and they're also from all backgrounds too. So the traditional stereotypical view of the homeless is dirty and dishevelled, drug addicts, mental health, is not the profile of the homelessness we're seeing today. And even relating to that, segment of homelessness, they're the ones that need the most help, in my opinion. So I don't necessarily say that they're worthless because they're dirty and dishevelled and all the rest. They're not. They're equal. A few days ago, I had an experience of meeting a man who was living in a forest for 7 years. Very lovely man, very gentle man. Had worked in his life. So we're not dealing with people who are wild and out in the bush who've never held down a job. They have. But for whatever the reason, there's been a trauma. And this is what I'm noticing through interviewing a lot of homeless. There's been a trauma that's actually rendered them vulnerable to circumstances of being without homes or without income. And from a higher quartile in our demographic, if you like, profile. So those who've come from the wealthy backgrounds, they have no clue. And I have been thinking a lot about how they are so disconnected. I've thought about how many of them are in Parliament. We don't have people who've come from poor backgrounds in Parliament. We don't have a diversity in Parliament. The business community are particularly those, the upper CEOs, so I'm not talking about small to medium-sized enterprises. I'm talking about the big business where they're making millions, and they look down upon those who have failed in their eyes or are too lazy to get a job. This is all propaganda. It's not true. It's actually not true. They're not too lazy to get a job. They may well be going through emotional traumas which make it very difficult for them to get work. They may have had, abuse in their backgrounds, and we're seeing that when we look at the Royal Commissions into family abuse, child abuse. It's rampant in our society. So it's not surprising that more people, particularly Caucasian Australians, ending up on the street because the support base isn't there. There's something missing within our culture that's not responding appropriately to those in severe poverty, and it plays itself out even when you're going for superannuation. If you're not on Centrelink, you're basically excluded from the entire system. So even the super funds won't release under severe hardship the money that belongs to you when you're needing it most. That's a structural discrimination, in my opinion. Now that I'm looking more deeply at these things because they've affected me. Had I not gone through what I've gone through, I would never have taken the time to do the work that I've done. So I'm going to read you a poem that I've written. Now, I thought I was going to take it from the tack of trying to create more visibility around the contrast and how people are treated. But the poem turned out quite differently, which is not uncommon with my poetry because I don't plan it. I go with the flow and I'm seeking for answers. So I'm going to read this poem to you. It is lengthy, but I recommend you stay with me because it gives insights into the fires. Often poetry reveals things that can't be seen. So the name that came to me, and I actually heard the music as I was thinking up the name, it's St. Elmo's Fire. So the poem's called Australia's St. Elmo's Fire is the Test. The burning bush is not a winter burn-off. It is not a seasonal regeneration, but a towering inferno of epic proportion. Smoke billowing, blanketing out the blue sky as communities are under siege, seeking to defend property. Unaware our right to property is the real firestorm, so help me God. A climate of change in government is not responsive to the real ecological crisis. A climate of change in business is not responsive to sustainability as they aim for more growth with less. Yet it is market-based economics that is the red-hot ember that won't go out of season. Cutting public services as undergrowth is neglected, for they cannot see the forest for the wood. Nature is a raw material costed for production, not a natural wonder maintaining ecological function. People are human resources costed per hour, not human beings growing up to empower. Seen through the Googles of economics, life is an algorithm, not a Rubik's Cube. The yoke of debt is not an act of God, but unaffordable rent. As business as usual is endless chaos, not order. As we look for the quick buck, not the long-term fix. Markets have short horizons, not over the horizon radars advancing civilization to higher expressions. For to see beyond the space-time continuum of self-interest is to realise the universe is the one song in tune with nature. The wildfires have become a fire sale, destroying millions of hectares in the blaze will increase market prices. 500 million animals perished in the smoke haze, impacting the biomass as prayers were not answered. Homeless people camping in the bush were raised, gaining no relief, or went missing without alarm. Renters were given no grants or land, as property owners are hardworking and deserving. Government, media and business jumped on the bandwagon, not on the fire truck. Circling the wagons is not containment of disruption. Opportunities to strengthen brand images rather than imagine no brands. To ask for change, not coins. Still seeking a bounty from the mutiny. The mutiny on the bounty is to leave GDP. As branded cattle are piled on burial mounds, agricultural crops and harvesters went up in smoke. Timbers become cinders. Run for your life, abandoned possessions, beloved memories and pets. That is the test. To save lives, not things. To remember each other and lend an equal hand. For this is the meaning of the Aussie battler. Bush community, no common unity, as they battle fires with families and friends. Giving is to be good as gold, yet what if the gold is in being truly good? You would naturally give time and all you have. For it is human nature to give, not take away, to pitch in or risk losing all, as livelihood is to live your life, to be really alive. This is St. Elmo's fire testing your determination and stamina. From smouldering embers spark new shoots to push up, breaking new ground. From hardship comes rebirth of a renewable life. From pot ash comes a phoenix resurrecting renewal. And all can rise when you go down no further. For the rural farmers have suffered for years. They lost their voice. Mortgages as debt was the tourniquet squeezing livelihoods. Year on year as hard work doesn't yield. Many have been weighed down by what is not important in tears, by material things that are no longer bringing joy, by worries about money that never ends contracts, by conflicts from stress and out-of-touch bureaucracy, by family breakdown under pressure, by rising costs and uncertain futures. They have been the backbone of our country. Yet what if you look up to the stars, my friend? Take your hands from your eyes to see beyond, that a new day dawns every day. The sun rises from the east, setting in the west. To know that from bad seeds come good, from disruption comes clarity of purpose. If you can't get back what is a final demand, when one door closes, another opens, and the finale of life is to let go when it is done and dusted. To face fires, flood, famine, and drought fearlessly, as dawn, midday, and dusk mark time. For we must face the phases of the moon together. We must give a hand up and a hand out, no matter who is in need, as you are me, and I am you. Learn to let go of the seed of greed marketed as need. It is the fast breeder of fear. It is the terminator seed. For what you give away returns the bounty. What you earn, you give away in trust. As abundance is not in what you have, but who you are when you dig deep. And who you are is gratitude, service, and love without end. And these are the real seeds of St. Elmo's fire, is renewal. For the old must die, for the new to arise. We are one country under the Southern Cross. We are stewards, not owners. We are temporary, not permanent. When every one is deserving of charity. We are a nation girt by sea. From the coast to the forest to the deserts, we are free. We have boundless plains to share, to care, and air to breathe when we see the key, that we can regenerate our country's spirit. We are dreaming in the land of Oz. Starting again resets from 0 point. To nurture shattered lives by piecing together the puzzle as the final piece in the big picture. The deck chairs are rearranging on the Titanic, seeking to keep the currency afloat. The big issue is that Australians are sharing the bounty, not holding cards to the chest. As friends indeed, we are stepping up to lead. Mount Kosciuszko can be climbed in a day. The Murray can replenish a sunburnt country. The snowy mountains can rekindle Clancy of the overflow. As he drove cattle down mountain views where all hesitated to step off the real cliffhanger. He proved the impossible is possible. Courage leads whilst fear weighs the risks. In the high country, the Brumbies sniff the wind, adapting to climates of change, as they know which way to run. Australians know the struggle and the peaks. as we are heading for a depression of great magnitude, an economic earthquake shaken them up. The Great Barrier Reef sacrificed corals to pollution, favouring a crown of thorns. The Great Artesian Basin is sinking the water table as hard water is diverted and dries up. Salt lakes muddy clean waters. Fertilising biosciences grow at ever-diminishing returns akin antibiotics. Nature is not an electrical circuit board or linear cog in an industrial flywheel. It is a tipping point of infinitesimal sensitivity, where the sum of the parts is the whole. Descartes reduced life to boxes, not cells. Newton gravitated to apples, not seeds. Einstein's relativity theory was not absolute. Mythical dragons breathe fire, yet oxygen is fuel. Oxford became lost in space, seeking the last frontier. Dances with Wolves chose to go to the frontier country before it was lost. Buffaloes were killed for skins, not hunger. Science invented wars, losing the peace prize. For the real courage is to face what we have truly lost and not hesitate to act. We are lost in space, unable to make peace a priority. For until we do, we hesitate on the mountain view, unable to step off the cliff of uncertainty. As life is not predictable nor mechanical, it is a miracle. And only when you lose everything do you realise the true value of life. For this is the real gold. For indeed the fool's gold of awakening from the dream. Fire cleanses away debris to make way for renewable growth. To see the forest instead of the wood. To value nature as a flow, not a production process. For the real currency is love. What you truly love becomes visible in crisis. To breathe in nature's rhythm. To speak is nature's soundscape. To eat is nature's bounty given for free. For free dominion is nature's possibility that self-selects when the fruit is ripe. To fall from the tree at the perfect moment, as love withholds no wealth from life. As life is the real wealth, loving. And until you taste the sweetness, greed will be the bad seed replanted, yielding endless wars, fueling climates of disruptive change. For until the burning bush is seen as a message from the Creator, heralding that all peoples are chosen and that all roads lead home. For Rome will return to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve will plant an apple tree together, receiving nature's bounty at the perfect time in peace. Loving what is was always the peace that passeth all understanding. So that's Australia's St. Elmo's fire. I will post onto this video the poetry. And I'll finish off by saying it's a very hot day today. You can feel the heat. We're getting so much oscillations in temperature. It's very concerning. But again, that poem is reflecting on the real burning out of our indifference, our distance, our lack of care for one another. So crises can be a good thing because they bring everyone together and they bring people closer, because their work is what has divided them in truth. Their focus on money and all the worries that come with that. These are false economies. We have to start to think about doing things anew. This is what Einstein said. You cannot change anything from the same consciousness that created it. We have to learn to think anew. And that means a complete redefinition of the whole economic paradigm, which is based on infinite growth modelling. It's not about homeostasis. Marketing will talk sustainability, but the true sustainability is to not consume more than the next generation requires, and it is to come into homeostasis with the planet itself. So we can do climate modelling and we can set predetermined goals, and we can say we're going to reduce CO2 emissions by so much percent. But who has the holistic picture of what that actually does in respect of the natural homeostasis on the actual planet itself? Now, our disruption of nature is because we are not in touch with our own nature. Now, what came out of the fires was not money oriented. So you're not going to go, well, I'm going to charge you $50 an hour for helping you pack your things and leave. Now, there may well be emergency services, people who are paid who come, but for the most part, communities don't do that. They'll go, oh my God, let's help my friend, get him out. The priority in that moment of crisis becomes the life of that other person. But when we're sitting from the safety in very big buildings at the top, air-conditioned comfort, making decisions about people's lives, or coming from ideological positions that have no concept of poverty or inequality or hardship, who are making decisions over people's lives saying, this group is deserving, that group is not. It's a little bit like, it's funny, Nazi Germany came to mind then. I actually interviewed a Holocaust survivor when I was over in San Diego in the US. And she was a little girl, she was Jewish, when she was taken to Auschwitz. And she remembers the dogs, the violent dogs they were trained to attack, biting you if you move just a fraction out of line. Now, she got to the top of the line, and her name in German meant lucky. And the German goes, so do you feel lucky? She's sort of like, I hope so, she's a little girl. Yes. And he sent her to the work camp. Many of them die in the work camps because they work them to death and they starve them because they're objects. They're worthless. In the eyes of that fascist mindset that divides from others, we can say that in this case, the Jewish people were seen as the enemy. They were seen as inferior. Stories were made up about them in order to maximize hatred towards them. Because someone was threatened, rather than dealing with the inner threat that they felt, and these are people at the top, what they did was projected that discrimination onto them. And of course, there'll be others that had other vested interests, industrial interests around all of this. Same thing applies with homelessness and inequality and unemployment. We get the same propaganda and projections happening where we divide one from the other. I'm very, very sensitive now to labelling, and I will not enter into labels. I'm just reflecting back on Nazi Germany. This beautiful woman that I met, the other women helped her because she was a young girl and they wanted her to survive. They were thinking about the next generation. So they gave her some of their food. And these people were skin and bone. I'll never forget that. But this is where our detachment, our judgment, our us and them comes from. We're not in harmony with nature, which accepts all diversity in the one system. You don't see one plant fighting against another, although some will die out and some will replenish. Because nature is constantly looking at its sustainability, and the conditions are constantly changing, so nature adapts. It's very functional and sustainable. But there is no judgment in that. It's simply things growing, things dying off to ensure the whole survives. It's not one particular species that kills off the rest so it can survive. We have to learn homeostasis. We have to learn our true nature if we want to come into alignment with Earth systems to ensure that our planet comes back into balance. Our consciousness is a prime driver of the imbalance. because we are not at peace ourselves. I use imagery of the Garden of Eden. This all came up. See, I don't expect to write any of that. The Garden of Eden. And I saw Adam and Eve as equal, planting a new tree for more abundant fruit, but doing it together, not blaming one for actions in that garden. Because the gender inequality is part of the imbalance on the planet, which is expressing through the shift in climate. People go, how can that be? How can that tree and I be connected? Well, you're living on a living system. You are part of this system and you are impacting it whether you know it or not. And it impacts us. Many people have been on holidays. You go into nature to find peace. You're in a symbiotic relationship with nature. You're not separate. Yet we can get the impression we're completely divorced from nature when we live in buildings, in boxes. We're not living like the homeless man I met, living under a shelter, under a tree. He actually knows the names of the animals. This is someone who's coming home. He's letting go, and there's great wisdom in the life that he's living. And yet a person who believes in materialism as success and identity and personal worth would look at that one under the shelter as useless, as worthless. And yet, to our conversation with the guy, he's a Christian, I might add, and many of these ones in power are nowadays, he was returning to the truth of who he is. He had stopped the struggle. He had stopped the control. This is the beginning of wisdom. And I saw him being in nature as actually a very good thing for him. So I'll go and visit him and bring some joy into his life. And he's certainly brought joy into mine already. Great guy. So there's wonderful people everywhere. Don't judge anyone. And let's rekindle that Clancy of the Overdrive, the Overflow. Clancy was, he's a folk hero here in Australia. He was in the Snowy Mountains. Banjo Patterson wrote the story of Clancy, who was a young guy. These guys were all rural blokes on horseback. They were real traditional Australian. And he was the one that faced going down a very, very sheer cliff face. And all these guys were excellent horsemen. And they all went, no, we can't do it. We'll be killed. The horse will be killed. Clancy just went for it. Now, that came as inspiration when I wrote that poem, and I'm getting inspiration right now as I'm speaking it. We have to reclaim the Australian spirit, which is that toughness, that courage, that honesty. And that is our true culture here in Australia. This is a true Australian spirit. Very friendly, very helpful to each other. We have to come together to advance Australia fair. I feel that very strongly. So with that, I'll leave you in peace and joy. And I send love to those who lost material things. And it's funny, there's a hesitation around that, but I understand that we then go, oh, God, I have to start again. I have to go and buy all the stuff. Maybe don't buy all the stuff. But I send you compassion for your loss, definitely. And for those who've lost people or animals that they really adored, I send you a lot of love because I know you'll be really grieving the loss and feeling like where to from here. It takes time to get over the trauma of huge loss. Homeless people will relate to this because many of them have lost everything and are still finding themselves unable to get out of severe poverty. But I'm sure Australians, given the fires, will pull together because there is a popular movement here. But we need to reinvigorate that popular movement for all Australians whenever they are finding themselves homeless or in severe need. That is the Australian spirit. So I'll leave you with that. Send you love. Bye.